So we will call to order the Maryland State Board of Election. Thank you for those that are here and those that are joining in observance of the meeting. We will declare a quorum present. I believe we have one member absent, but we have our new member who has been duly sworn in. So we have 4 members. So we have a quorum and are able to vote on things today. Are there any additions to the, well, before I do that, welcome to our new board member, Mr. Michael Summers, who I believe resides in Prince George's County. And we welcome you to the board and look forward to working with you.
Likewise.
So are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, we move on to the approval of the minutes. I think everybody has had a chance to see them. I know, Michael Summers, you were not in the last meeting, but if you would be willing to vote for them, if unless anybody else found any additions, deletions, or corrections, we could do that today. If you're uncomfortable doing that, we would have to push that off to the next meeting.
No, I definitely reviewed the minutes that were sent out. I don't have a problem voting on them.
Great. Does anybody have any additions, deletions, or corrections to the minutes from the last, I believe it was open and closed? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve them as presented? That would be for the open and the closed meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
We'll take Mr. Summers as a second. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Okay, the minutes are approved. We now move to the election of officers. I believe there's 2 officers that we would have for today. We would have an election of the yearly election of the chairman and the vice chairman. I don't believe we have other offices at the state board. Are there any nominations for chair? We'll start with that one.
I'll nominate Bill Volk to be chairman for another year.
Are there any other nominations?
I would second that.
Nomination and a second. Any other nominations for chair? Seeing none, all those in favor of Bill Volk being chair for until we have our rollover, I guess, in June, signify by raising your hand. And then we will have for vice chair, which Justin Williams has been filling in since the unfortunate demise of our friend Malcolm Funn. And I like to take the prerogative of nominating Justin Williams for vice chair, having served with him now and having the utmost respect for him and the way he operates. Is there a second?
I second that.
Any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing none, all those in favor of Justin Williams to serve as vice chair signify by raising your hand. It is unanimous. Thank you very much. I believe that's the end of our election portion of the meeting. Move on to our administrator's report. Oh, and let me say here again, please only give highlights as we go through the report. We certainly can read the report. And I would say for our staff, as you're giving a report, please be sensitive to Mr. Michael Summers, who's new with us today, that if there's any acronyms or things that the others may take for granted, if you could, you might need to take another moment and spell that
out. Go ahead, Jared.
I was gonna lead it off to welcome another new person to the SBE staff and to the Candidacy and Campaign Finance Division, Diane Zagorski. She is a new audit manager in our division. She previously worked over at Howard County as the Bureau Chief of Tax Revenue and was the point person over there for the public financing program. She's very excited. She's been now with us for almost a month, 3 weeks or so. She's, getting, basically getting thrown into the deep end with campaign finance and a report that's due on Friday. So it's been great having her on board, and she's very excited to be here.
Great. Thank you very much and welcome welcome to Diane for us, please. Who's next?
Thanks, Jared. So I'll proceed with a few highlights and then turn it back over to various other individuals. To bring to your attention, we had 2 legislative briefings since our last meeting. The House Ways and Means asked us to answer some questions about the primary election in September. Well, they asked us to come in September to answer questions about the primary election, and we were joined by several representatives of the local boards of elections. And the legislature's AELR committee, which is the Administrative, Executive, and Legislative Regulations Committee, they're the ones that approve our regs. And they asked us to provide an overview of all of the regulations that you all have adopted in the last year or so. The window became effective in 2022. So as you know, we had a lot to cover with them, both emergency and regular process. So we had that briefing in October. Just want to highlight 2 things from the primary. It seems weird, we're starting voting tomorrow, but yet we still have some loose ends from the primary. We issued a final written report on the primary election. And this is something, Michael, that we do after each election, where we just highlight things that happened and sort of draw some trends and take a look at it. It's long, so maybe if you have insomnia one night, you want to take a look at that. But a huge team effort. I wanted to call out everybody on the state board staff that helped writing their piece of it and working on it flow. So thank you. And then, Mr. Chairman, at last month's meeting, you asked some questions for some data on a mail-in voting based on delivery method. And so I included a table in the administrator's report that I believe, a table and narrative that answers the questions that you asked. I'm looking at the differences between data from military and overseas voters, which is the acronym UOCAVA, which stands for the Federal Uniformed and Overseas Civilian Absentee Voting Act, which means military and overseas voters. And then our other voters, which are domestic civilian voters, based on how they received their ballots. So I believe that answers your question. If it doesn't, please let me know.
Thank you. I believe it does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So looking now to the general election, I will turn it over to Mary Ann to give some updates on the election judges.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't have a microphone problem. Okay, so we are still forwarding healthy lists of potential judges to the local boards, with the exception of about 9 LBEs, or that's local board of elections, local boards that have indicated they're in a good place, that they believe that they have their full complement for the early voting and election day. There is a number there, 8,000 applicants. That includes the list that the State Board of Elections collects from their election judge page, as well as those nonprofit organizations we receive lists from. We have also provided a newly developed online training program to assist the local boards to offer convenient, accessible, and alternative method of training their returning judges. So does anyone have any questions for me?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Donna, did you want to highlight anything about voter education other than what's in the written report? Nope.
No, nothing.
Okay.
There was another press release issued this morning, and I believe we sent it out to you. If not, let me know. I'll get it out.
Thank you,
Okay.
Donna.
Melissa, anything to highlight? And then Jen?
I think just 2 things. October 18th marked the advanced deadline to register to vote. Same day registration is still available and postcards were sent out to a little over 700,000 people who are eligible to use that. And on the 22nd, we did our big kind of transport of data that takes it from our system and dumps it into the poll books to use for early voting and on election day. And so we have gotten that ready to go. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I pass off to Jen.
Thanks, Melissa. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I just wanted to report in a little bit about mail-in voting. In your report, there's some statistics from earlier in the week or late last week, I think, or when we published the, I should say, when we published the agenda and the reports online. But by way of update, I wanted to let you all know that we are, I believe we've recently passed 600,000 requests for mail-in voting. About 85% of those requests have come for someone who would like to get their ballot in the mail. And approximately a little less than 15% have requested to get their ballot by web delivery. So they go online and have an opportunity to print it off themselves. At the same time, the most recent numbers I have is that we are approaching over 180,000 of those ballots returned. And it's approximately right at this point, a 50-50 split between people returning them by US mail and people returning them in drop boxes across the state. So we will keep you updated. As you can imagine, right about now, those numbers are changing fast and furious. The last day to request, I shouldn't say the last day to request your ballot by mail. The last time we're going to send a massive drop of requests for mail to our vendor, Taylor, will be this Friday. So any requests between Friday and the deadline for requesting a mail-in ballot by mail will have to be fulfilled by the individual LBE local boards of election to get those out. And we've been working closely with them to make sure they're aware of that deadline. And that's pretty much, I just wanted to give you that update. And we post a lot of this information, obviously, on our website, but you can also reach out to us if you ever want a latest and greatest number. Thanks. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind, and you may not know the answer to this off the top of your head. Do you know how that 600,000 number corresponds to 2020 by any chance at the same time in 2020?
Nikki, you might have the number in your head. I know it's more.
Yeah, I think we had about 1.5 million in 2020 general.
Okay.
I'm going from memory, could be off. We're lower than 2020 general.
Yeah, lower than 2020 general by half at least.
Yeah, that's about right, but significantly higher than anything we've ever had before 2020.
Of course, and with 15% on the internet, that's alarming because they all need to be duplicated. Yeah, just trying to get a base, that's all. Thank you very much. Thanks. Any other questions up to now from the board?
To that question of the 600 or the 1.3 million, did COVID have anything to do with that large uptick?
Yes, it had everything to do. So before 2020, typically turnout by mail was about 5 to 6% of turnout. And then because of COVID, of course, the primary was a complete vote by mail with just a few in-person voting. And then the general was people had to ask for it, but about half of our voters voted that way. So we're just trying to figure out what our new normal is. It doesn't look like we're going back to pre-2020. But it doesn't look like we're doing 2020 either. So we're eagerly awaiting to see what happens this election. In the primary, about 50% of our voters voted before election day. About 38% of them voted by mail, with the rest voting in person during early voting, and then the rest voting on election day. So we're just waiting to see how it's all going to shake out, how people want to vote.
Thank you.
I'm going to just bring to your attention the paragraph in the administrator's report about pre-election day canvassing. We have 11 local boards that have already started counting ballots, mail-in ballots. They're not releasing results, so those are all embargoed until election night. But we have 11 local boards that have started counting ballots before election day. The remainder will be starting the Thursday after election day. And the list of the counties that are started early are in the administrator's report.
Thank you.
There isn't anybody from voting system or IT on, so I'll just bring to your attention, the pre-election testing is wrapping up in the report. I don't know if Keith is on to talk about anything. I do see Keith. Anything you wanted to highlight, Keith?
No, not today.
Okay. And so one final thing that we didn't get in the administrative report, I just wanted to bring to your attention that earlier this week, Tracy and I selected the early voting centers that will be audited. That's part of the manual audit after the election, where the local boards will hand count ballots cast in these early voting centers. So we selected those and have notified the local boards of those locations, so that tomorrow there's certain special activities that have to happen there so that they can conduct that audit after the fact. But just wanted to let you all know. And then with that, I'll turn it back to Melissa for anything she wants to highlight in voter registration, and then we'll just proceed through the report.
I don't think I have anything to highlight there, just the election prep.
Okay, well, thank you. And then I guess I'll go next. Just one things I want to highlight is that the pre-general 2 campaign finance report is due on Friday. And if there's any failure to file or a late fee or a winner, the commission to assume office will not be issued. So they have to be in complete compliance in order to assume office. And the only other thing I just want to make note of is I have a memo in there just about international observers and the 2 entities that are currently that asked to observe elections. So there's a memo in there, but outside of that, those are the only things I wanted to highlight.
Thank you.
Our voting system and public team are busy supporting getting ready for tomorrow. So there's an update for each of the new projects that are on the horizon, looking ahead already, replacing the voting system and the new poll books. So there's blurbs in there. You'll be hearing lots more about that as we move forward. And I'll turn it back to Keith.
Good afternoon, board members. Presented to you for the Project Management Office is the update of significant efforts being worked on. If there are any questions, please let me know.
And the final section of the report is the information security section. Just with it being right before the election, wanted to highlight a few things that are different from the report last month. We've had a couple briefings since the last meeting preparing for the election. The Maryland Department of Emergency Management coordinated a briefing for state and local election officials and local emergency management officials, where we get a weather briefing, we get a threat briefing, and a public health briefing. So we had that last week, and there'll be a second one next week, right before the election day. And there have also been several briefings by our federal partners on the current threat landscape, what they're seeing, what we should be on the lookout for. So these relationships that we've established over the years are providing helpful information as we get ready for voting.
Great. Is there anything else in the report? I don't see. Does any board member have any questions about any part of the report up to this point? Seeing none, thank you very much for the administrator's report. That is accepted and we'll go into the record. Now we move to the Assistant Attorney General's report.
Good afternoon, board members. The Assistant Attorney General's report is mercifully a little shorter this week or this month. I'll go through it briefly. At the top of the list, the litigation over early canvassing and the petition to allow early canvassing wrapped up in the past month. On October 7th, Friday, October 7th, the Court of Appeals issued an order affirming the Circuit Court for Montgomery County, permitting early canvassing to begin on October 1st. Critically, the Court of Appeals did not issue an opinion yet explaining their reasoning, their legal reasoning for affirming the Circuit Court. That is expected in the next weeks to probably month, and that will bear greatly on the state board's authority in the future to seek a petition like this. Exactly how they arrived at their conclusion. So we'll be looking out for that. The second case, Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, was a petition challenge in Baltimore City. During the last month's meeting, I had noted that the time for an appeal had passed. And yet, on September 30th, the plaintiff organization against whom the court ruled filed a notice of appeal. The Office of the Attorney General immediately filed a motion to dismiss the appeal as untimely, and we're awaiting a resolution in the Court of Special Appeals on that motion to dismiss. The third case, the Gibson case, nothing has changed. The plaintiff in Gibson had requested, and the Attorney General's office assented to an extension for them to reply to the motion to dismiss. Their new due date for their reply is November 7th. And hopefully after November 7th, we'll get a resolution from the court on the plaintiff's request for a preliminary injunction in that case. In Johnson versus Hogan, I believe the hearing itself, well, the hearing was on October 4th. It was close to this, this board's meeting. After the hearing, it was soon after the hearing, about a week, the federal district court denied the plaintiff's request for injunctive relief. So OAG prevailed in that case on behalf of Governor Hogan. At this point, injunctive relief was denied, although the case is technically still active. In the near future, the Office of the Attorney General is going to file a motion to dismiss to essentially dispose of that case now, especially that the deadline for write-in candidacy has passed. And then finally, the Win-Red case out of the 8th Circuit was argued before a panel of 3 appellate judges in front of the 8th Circuit and submitted on October 18th. I am going to take it off of next month's report, and when the 8th Circuit issues its opinion and we get a result in that case, I'll report it back to the board.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the Assistant Attorney General? Seeing none, thank you for your work. Little by little, we're starting to like you almost as much as Andrea. So that's not easy to do. So thank you for your work. We appreciate it. We know you've worked very hard on our behalf, and it's appreciated. Thank you. Great. So now I believe we move on to the approval of regulations. I believe we have 2 final adoptions and 1 proposed changes to campaign finance. Is that correct?
Yes, so I will take subsection A and then Jared will take the rest.
Okay.
So I'll be presenting for final adoption, which means that you all have already reviewed and approved these for publication. The regulations have gone out for public comment. It was a 30-day public comment period. That period closed, and now they are ready for your final adoption. If you approve them for final adoption, they are published in the Maryland Register, and they become effective typically 10 days after the publication of the final notice. So we're on the tail end of this process for these regulations. So these are a variety of different regulations that were approved for publication back in June, a couple of meetings in June. And so there's 5 general regulations. One is about allowing a voter to use an electronic device to prove ID or residency. This is in response to MVA authorizing a authentic digital driver's license, I guess, for lack of a better word. You approved this as an emergency regulation, so it could be in effect for the primary election. This is just, we also adopted it, presented it as a proposed reg, so it would be permanent. The second one relates to changes to the signature curing process to make it mirror a legislation introduced in the 2022 session. And this was already adopted as emergency. This is just making them permanent. Number 3 on the memo is about multiple ballots from the same voter. Again, you've already adopted these as emergency. This is making them permanent. And the general rule is you count the mail-in ballot over the provisional, with the exception that if the mail-in ballot is received after the provisional is counted, then you would reject it. We had to tweak some language under polling place reassignment section to reflect the fact that we now have precinct level ballot styles. It's a non-technical, it's a non-substantive change. This one was not introduced as emergency, so this one is just the slow-moving process, but this one is ready for final adoption as well. And the last is actually one if there are questions, I'll defer to Jared, but it's about allowing a polling place that has an alcohol license to be used as a voting center. Again, already adopted as and approved as emergency. This is just making it permanent, and this is the result of legislation from the recent session. So these were all published in the August 26th edition of the Maryland Register. We did not receive any public comments on any of these. These were all before we even presented them to you in the summer. We had presented them to the Maryland Association of Election Officials, and they had provided any comment that they had. So we did receive comment or offered comment to the local election officials before presenting them, and we didn't receive any public comment as a result of the 30-day publication in the Maryland Register.
Great. Does anyone on the board have any questions about, either in general or any one of the 5 proposed regulations for final approval? So if there's no questions, the chair would certainly entertain, and unless somebody has a reason, and I'm happy to split these up if any board member has a reason to do so. But if there is no reason brought up, we could accept one motion for the approval of all 5 final adoptions, which is we could read them into the record at 33.07.04.02, election day activities, 33.11.03.06, absentee ballots, 33.11.05.04, and 33.16.06.04, rejecting ballots, 33.15.03.03 and 04 for polling place reassignment, and 33.15.1.03.07 polling place alcohol beverage license. Those are the 5. Chair would entertain a motion for final approval.
So moved on all 5 regulatory or regulation actions.
Second that.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. It is unanimous. All 5 have passed. Thank you very much, Nikki.
Thank you.
Now we move, I guess, to Mr. Jared. How are you?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nikki. So the ones that are for final adoption were approved at the April 27th meeting. They were published in the Maryland Register in August 26th, and the public comment period closed on September 26th, and there was no public comments received for these regulations. These regulations, sorry, I should have introduced them, were all about the Public Financing Act and the changes that were initiated from legislation. It is a lengthy list. Good luck, Chair, going through all the numbers there for everything here. But in the 2021 legislative session, the General Assembly completely overhauled the public financing program and basically modeled it after the county programs, which is a tiered matching program rather than a grant program that was initially, I would say, contemplated for the gubernatorial program. So it eliminated the expenditure limit, brought in a tiered program, and it also eliminated the primary general kind of distinction for how to match and seed money. So this basically overhauled all these regs now are basically overhauled along with the legislation to match it. So basically, everything seems to be ready for final adoption.
Thank you. Does anybody on the board have any questions about the, only these, we'll have some more new ones proposed, but these are for final adoption of 33.14.01, 02, 03, 04, and 05. Does anyone have any questions about the final adoption of the above mentioned? Is there a motion to, for final adoption approval of them as read?
So moved.
Or second?
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. And we move now to some proposed campaign finance regulations.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Chair. So the first one here is 331302. This is about a final report. So basically, it just codifies the existing practice that a political committee officially closes upon receipt and approval of the state board of the submitted final report. It's just basically clarifying that we have to review it and approve that it is a final report rather than them just saying that it's a final report, because there could be some deficiencies on that report as well. 33131001 just proposes a definition of a firewall, which was from an issued declaratory ruling on firewalls from this agency. So it just puts it in, it just codifies basically a state board policy. 04 about coordinated expenditures. This modification of the existing regs is to conform with election law article 13249 by changing the terms from in-kind contributions to coordinated expenditures, which is what is in the law, and from substantial to non-incidental for republication, again, mirroring with the law. So and the other part too, which is it sets parameters regarding the use of the same vendor by a candidate and an independent expenditure entity supported by a candidate. So it just puts in those regulations as well. 33132003 is about recurring contributions. This is in 2022, the General Assembly passed House Bill 15, which requires political committees to seek authorization from donors for all recurring contributions. This was in response to the last presidential election, where a lot of individuals did not know that they were signing up for recurring contributions by a political committee, and they were getting billed monthly for contributions until they hit the contribution limits. So the General Assembly put in some safeguards about that. However, the idea of payroll deductions, which is a recurring contribution, but at the same time is governed by other laws and has strict protocols already in place. This regulation is just basically clarifying the requirement that payroll deductions are solely governed by those provisions and not the recurring contribution provisions. This was, I believe, we'll probably get some comments from the unions and other entities that do this in favor of that. In 331322, legal expenses. This was in 2022, the General Assembly changed the idea of payment of legal expenses relating to contesting election results. So in SB 101, it repealed the provisions for allowing individuals to pay reasonable legal expenses without counting towards the contribution limits, and it allowed for committees to use their own accounts to pay for it. So these regulations repeal the outdated provisions now. So that talked about all of the legal expenses there. So it was with scope, establishment, management, and applicability of the contribution limits and permissible uses and prohibitions. So those are all about repealing outdated provisions. And the one about the contribution limits is that now that it counts towards their contribution limits if it's for payment of a legal expense or if they're fundraising to pay a legal expense. 331323 is about exploratory committees. So these regulations here we've we've had this in the summary guide since 2014 about exploratory committees. And this policy has been based upon past advice from the Attorney General's office. So this is just codifying the summary guide and the past advice and our policies as regulations for exploratory committees. And, the 01 is definitions where it defines the terms for draft and exploratory committees. 02 is applicability, which is who may establish a draft or exploratory committees. 03 talks about candidate prohibitions, which a candidate may not establish, a current candidate may not establish an exploratory committee. So meaning, this one means that if you're currently having a political or a candidate committee that is registered with the State Board of Elections, you can seek other offices, you can explore, but you have to use your political committee. You can't create a vehicle like these exploratory committees, which is outside the regulatory framework of the election law article to seek that office. You have to stay within it. 04 talks about scope, about the purpose of an exploratory committee. 05 is permissible disbursements. This is again based upon Attorney General advice and the summary guidance that we've been issuing since 2014. Prohibitions that, the idea is that these committees are kind of outside the framework of the contribution and regulatory framework of the election law article. And so that, you can't pre-purchase services or items for as an exploratory committee to be used once the candidate establishes an authorized candidate committee, so that you can't kind of try to circumvent contribution or expenditure laws. 07 is about receipt of funds that codifies that contribution limits are not, applied to draft or exploratory committees. 08 says that all exploratory committees are still required to have an authority line because the authority line law talks about basically candidates or draft candidates as well. 09 is about bank accounts and that, that they need a bank account. 10 talks about codifies that an exploratory committee may transfer up to $6,000 to a political committee, basically treating it as a person under the law. And 11 codifies how an exploratory committee can dispose of its surplus funds. That's basically the codification of our policy with best practices as well. 331801 is now about violations and civil penalties. So in 2022, they passed Senate Bill 15, which was departmental legislation. So it increased civil penalties to a maximum of $1,000 for certain violations. The proposed regulations here increase civil penalties to misery with the increase in the statutory authority. So, it's not all the penalties have gone up to $1,000, but some of the smaller infractions were raised in order to increase up to $1,000 across the board there. So that's that chart of civil penalties that you see there and the changes there. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the regulations.
You've been busy.
I try, and
We'll first put it out. Does anybody on the board have any? I believe it basically is encompassed in, some general areas that are done. It looks like 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6. Is it 6 different areas that is being dealt with here? Does that sound correct?
yes.
So does anyone on the board have any questions about those 6 different areas?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, Chair, it's not really, a question. It's a moot point given the legislation on the legal expenses. That's more of a question. So I'm thinking ahead of, like, if a law firm gave in kind services for contesting an election, so is there a provision, or do you know, would that count towards the contribution limit if the law firm does that sort of service or donates it in kind?
Yes. So basically, they can up to $6,000, but then after that, then, you know, basically now law firms have to get paid. They can't write it all off.
Recovering lawyer, I understand.
Just be like this. I wish I could give you more than $6,000, but now you have to pay me.
Just curious. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. How does the first regulation we spoke of about not saying it's final until you all determine it's final? Is there anything contemplated, or tell me how you communicate back to that campaign? I can just imagine a campaign assuming that they have submitted a final report and then closing down the PO, you know what I mean? Closing down some means of communication that may exist, and then not getting the notice that, hey, this actually wasn't final. How are we mitigating against
We send
that?
them all notices, because at that point we send them a little letter, basically saying, you received your final report, has been accepted, your account is closed, because we want to tell them then you have to maintain your records for an additional 2 years.
Okay.
And then after the 2-year period from this date of this letter here, you can get rid of all your records. And when we tell them if there's issues, we say, you can't close because you owe us like late fees. We have a form letter that we spit out with that. We go through, this year in particular, we have a lot of accounts that close right after the primary, and we're going to expect a lot that are going to close with the November report, because candidates that lose just kind of close out and just don't want to file any more reports. But we give every campaign that files a final report a notice, whether it's accepted or if it's rejected, why it's rejected.
Okay. And then I had just a couple questions around the attorney stuff, because that all, makes me go like this a little bit, when we start talking about campaigns paying legal fees. And I know there was some stuff that was dealt with recently about that. It is still true under anything here, and already was true, that a campaign can only use campaign funds to pay for legal campaign issues. Is that correct?
So the idea of that campaigns before 101, Senate Bill 101, campaigns could have received contributions in excess of the contribution limits, or received monies from other sources to pay for legal expenses. But Senate Bill 101 closed that loophole and basically said, if you're going to contest an election, you can use your campaign account to contest the election to pay for legal fees. But at the same token, you have to abide by the contribution limits.
Okay, that's great. I guess what my question was, and maybe I didn't, probably me not asking it right. Let's say that there's other legal issues that a candidate may have. What I want to make sure that candidate can't do is collect funds that people are giving, thinking that they're having this person get elected, but yet they're used to pay for things that are not campaign related.
So the scope of legal expenses in 101 is that it has to be maintaining, it has to be associated with maintaining or contesting the results of an election.
Okay, great. And then, okay. And is there a maximum, what has to be for election? So if the state initiates out of your office, let's say, or to the Attorney General's office is where it would come from, action against a candidate for some kind of other bad act, can campaign funds be used to cover the defense of those bad acts?
So It has to be related to their electoral purpose, and there's AG advice opinions about that. And the Fulton matter was one of them. It depends on the situation. If, for example, I rob a bank, right? I'm a candidate and I rob a bank because that's where the money is, and then I use that money to finance my campaign. Me getting charged for robbing the bank, even though it was for my political purpose, is not something that you can use your campaign account for, because it's too tangential to the electoral process. But if you're served with, say, a subpoena on the committee for your campaign finance records, those legal fees can be paid for with campaign funds because it's directly related to your campaign account.
Thank you. Thanks. Any of those generate other questions for any member of the board? I don't want to close this down or stop anybody from having their questions answered.
I do have a question, point of clarification in regards to political committees versus exploratory committees. And I know I heard you, but I may have misunderstood or misheard. They are two distinctly different things, but is the political committee law applied to the exploratory committee?
No.
Portion, or so the definitions and their laws are distinctly different and separate.
Yes.
Right?
So an exploratory committee is talking about a prospective candidate for public office and in looking to determine that potential candidate's viability for that public office. Whereas a political committee is, a candidate committee, you're already a candidate then at that point there. So once you open up a authorized candidate campaign account, you're a candidate under the law. You don't know what office you're seeking, but you're regulated. You have to file campaign finance reports. You have to, there's a $6,000 contribution limit. You're inside the regulatory structure.
But I can set up an exploratory committee.
Only if you're not a candidate currently.
Only if you're not a candidate currently.
Right.
Okay. That helps. Now, as an exploratory committee, do I have a final finance report due at the end of any period?
No, exploratory committees, because, the General Assembly has never required anything. This is basically just codifying what an exploratory committee can do and the activities before it hits the threshold of crossing into being a political committee.
And so, but I can collect contributions.
Yeah, you can collect contributions, but the only thing that you can do is once you can only move over $6,000 from exploratory committee into a candidate committee or transfer it out. So it's not like, and by having the prohibition on prepaying, it's trying to say that you can't use this as a vehicle to, I would say, hide resources to prepay for services or campaign material that is not going to be disclosed on a regular campaign finance report.
But I don't have.
Right.
I don't have those same limits though. I don't, as far as I don't have those same limits, and I can give to other campaigns from that exploratory committee.
Correct.
Okay.
That's an excellent question. And to piggyback on that, haven't we, or is this a loophole where we've created somewhat of an advantage to somebody who's not already in office and exploring running for a different office?
I would say that this loophole's always been there. We're just trying to actually codify the state, the practices of the summary guide and the past attorney general advice on this. And by codifying this and putting it through regulations, it might even spur the General Assembly to kind of act on this, because now they can really, they're really looking at it, because it's got to go through all the committees as well. So they might even want to take a look at that.
Because serious. I mean, it's problematic because if you are, let's say you are a county council person,
Mhm.
and you cannot set then a separate exploratory committee to run for a county executive post. But
Right.
if you were not holding office, you could set that up and begin gaining funds that were not overseen. That's a
Yeah.
problem. Yeah. But, I mean, it's a legislative problem. I don't know that
Right.
there's anything we can
Exactly,
do
Right.
at home here, but I think we've identified a problem that the legislature should be addressing here. So if anyone's listening today,
I
so.
believe there's always people that are listening.
Yes, but I do see that as an issue and as unfair to someone who is already in office, so. Are there any other questions? So, to read these in, if there's a motion, unless, again, I'm happy to separate these if anyone has any reason to want to do that. But we are considering 6 different areas, 33.13.02.03 as being number 1, 33.13.10.01 and 04, and then 33.13.20.03, 33.13.22.01 to 03, and 05 to 07, then 33.13.23.01 through .11, and finally 33.18.02. Is there a motion to approve all the proposed campaign finance regulations as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by raising your hand.
Stan Frompovich.
It is a unanimous vote.
Excellent. Thank you. I guess I'm up again here for waivers of late fees. So,
So keep on coming.
so in front of you is recommendations for waivers on 32 committees for a full waiver or a reduction in the waiver for your approval. I'll be happy to answer any one in particular. If not, I present to you the recommendations for the board to approve, and for just for the board's knowledge, but no actions needed, that we did deny 7 waiver requests, and with the reasons in the packet. Overall, we've collected so far to date over $62,000 in late fees. So if I just present them to the board for your approval on that.
Anyone on the board have any questions about any of the late fee waivers as presented?
A sort of tangential question, Mr. Chair. Thinking about the last regulation change with the civil infraction maximum and where the fines here go and late fees go. Jared, did these go to general fund or they go to a fund for campaign finance?
They go to the gubernatorial fair campaign finance fund. It helps.
Okay.
So all the bad actors help fund clean elections or that.
Do all of our, do you know, or does anyone know, do all of the fees and fines that we assess as a board or agency go to that same fund, or is there some that go to the general fund? Or
So
somewhere else?
all the civil penalties that we collect, candidate filing fees, late filing fees, they all go to the fund, as well as some ethics funds, fines as well. We collect, we reach over to ethics as well and take their
And just to bring, Michael, to bring you up to speed, our vote is only necessary for the board when a fee is waived. So the fees that are not recommended for waiving are presented to us to C, and the reasons are there why they're not waiving. But our vote is required when a fee is then to be waived. That's why it's presented like it is. So are there any questions on any of the waivers of fees? So is there a motion to accept the fee waivers as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by raising your hand. It is unanimous. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Warn you out. Thank you. So moving to old business, is there any old business that we have to deal with today? Seeing none, is there any new business on the agenda? There was none that I knew of. Okay, this is a time for disclosure of campaign contributions. Does anyone have any campaign contribution to disclose? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to the scheduling of our next meeting. After discussing with the staff what we normally would do because of a few things, because of the holidays in November and December, and because of the fatigue from getting through an election and then getting through to certification after that election, we typically would have one meeting for November and December, and that meeting would be sometime in early September. It is not necessary for this board to certify the election. That's done by the State Board of Canvassers. So we do not need to call a meeting to that end. So the date that I'd like to propose to see if that works for the members here of the board is Thursday, December 8th. Does that work? Thursday, December 8th.
Works for me.
It works for the board. Let me just ask real quick, Nikki, would we contemplate having a lot of business that day? Should we start at 1 or should we start that at 2?
I don't know. I can't think it's going to be a lot, but I don't think we're going to be presenting a lot of regs to you all. The regs you just approved won't be ready for publication yet. Probably won't be ready for final adoption yet. So I would think it's probably relatively light agenda. It would just be wrapping up, wrapping up the election.
Okay. So let's propose 2 p.m. then on Thursday, December 8th. That works for everybody. That is our scheduled next meeting. Now, of course, I am not ready on the closed meeting, so let me get up the script for the closed meeting. We will be moving into closed session, and I will be presenting the reasons why here in just a moment. Let me say that we will not be coming back into open session to then close the meeting. This will conclude our meeting, our business in the open meeting. There's no further business to do. We're going to enter into closed meeting, I believe only for one purpose this time. So now the board will consider whether to meet in closed session to discuss the compensation of employees over whom the board has salary setting authority as permitted in section 3-305B1 of the general provisions article. This exemption applies to a discussion among the members of the board regarding a personnel matter that affects a specific individual. Meeting in closed session will allow the members of the board to be briefed on personnel matters and share their views without compromising the confidentiality of those discussions. May I have a motion to meet in closed session?
So moved.
Moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by raising your hands. So it is unanimous to move into closed session. The motion having passed, the board will meet in closed session in accordance with exemption B1 of Section 3-305 of the Open Meetings Act. Again, we will not be coming back into the open session to close the meeting. This will conclude our public business. And members of the board, how about 3:10? Does that work for everybody? 3:10, that gives us about 9 minutes. So we'll see you in closed session, and thank you very much for everyone, for everything that's going on. Look, let me just say as we close, what an amazing amount of work that's being done statewide. I am just always grateful to what's going on at the state board with that staff and all the local board that are just going through, here's where the rubber hits the road, early voting starting, and we're just, we're so thankful for the work that's being done by all of our election officials across the state. So thank you very much, and see everybody soon.